Welcome to the Emancipated Mind Show. My name is Anneshia Freeman. I'm also known as the locksmith because I make keys for locks in the mind. I'm an award-winning master-level therapist, and I also have an MBA. I'm the creator of a cognitive restructuring program entitled The Lies That Bind. This show exposes and challenges dysfunctional unconscious beliefs that cause people to engage in self-defeating behaviors repeatedly despite the consequences. This show is streamed live via Facebook and YouTube every Thursday from 7 o'clock p.m. to 7:45 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Again, welcome to the Emancipated Mind Show. Hello, everyone. My name is Anneshia Freeman. I'm also known as the locksmith because I make keys for locks in the mind. Welcome to episode 9 of the Emancipated Mind Show. This show exposes the root causes of many problems that people face in their personal lives and in their professional lives. Problems such as self-sabotage, procrastination, perfectionism, dysfunctional relationships, people-pleasing, addictions, and low self-esteem. Tonight, this is part 2 on addictions. So last week, I talked about several dysfunctional unconscious beliefs that cause people to develop alcohol and drug addictions. I talked about several what I call victim-based beliefs. This week, I'm going to talk about several villain-based beliefs that can also cause people to develop addictions to drugs and alcohol. And like I mentioned last week, there's lots of different addictions. People develop addictions due to using certain behaviors and substances as dysfunctional coping mechanisms. So there's more than one type of addiction that can be caused by these dysfunctional unconscious beliefs that I talk about during my Facebook Live series. So there's shopping addictions, gambling addictions, food addictions, all sorts of addictions. But I'm going to focus due to the limited amount of time that I have on the episode. I'm going to focus on how dysfunctional unconscious beliefs can cause people to develop addictions to drugs and alcohol. And so I'm going to tell you just a little more about myself. The introduction described some of my history and my expertise, but I'm a master's level therapist, meaning I have a master's in social work. I also have a master's in business administration, and I'm a person in long-term recovery. And what that means is I have not used any drugs or alcohol in over 22 years. I'm also in recovery from trauma and dysfunctional relationships. So this topic that I'm covering tonight is very near and dear to my heart because I am a person in long-term recovery. And I spent the first 12 years of my career as a counselor working with court-mandated people who struggle with alcohol and drug addictions. So I'm going to start by identifying the dysfunctional unconscious belief. I'll talk about how the belief is implanted into a person's mind during the formative years. The brain is developed, the mind is programmed. The mind is programmed primarily during those critical foundation years that they call the formative years, by how a person is treated and by what a person observes. I'll talk about how these beliefs, these dysfunctional unconscious beliefs, can follow a person into his or her adult life and affect their personal life and their professional life. Then I'll talk about how drugs and alcohol act as temporary suppression. A lot of people call alcohol a truth serum. I call it liquid issue suppression. So whenever you hear me use the terms issues, unaddressed issues, lies, and the buttons that people push, I'm referring to the same thing. I'm referring to dysfunctional, unconscious beliefs that cause people to engage in self-defeating behaviors repeatedly despite the consequences. So let's start with the first one. Tonight, this, as I said, We're talking about villain-based beliefs. So many people struggle with this villain-based belief. People are nerve-wracking and barely tolerable most of the time. Villain based beliefs are just as unconscious as victim based beliefs. Last week, I talked about the victim based belief don't make waves, and the victim based belief people are only tolerating you. The villain based beliefs are just as unconscious. A person who struggles with this belief wouldn't walk into a room and say, "Hello, I believe that people are nerve wracking and barely tolerable most of the time." It's an unconscious belief, but it causes a lot of problems. It causes just as many problems as the victim-based beliefs we talked about last week. So let's talk about how this belief or this issue can be implanted into a person's mind during the formative years. So let's say a child is raised in an environment in which he or she observed people acting as if everybody got on their nerves. If they observed or overheard people talking about how nerve-wracking people are and how they don't like being around people because people are nerve-wracking and they get on their nerves, or they observe someone acting in that manner. One noted expert, I have to follow the Facebook rules. I'm not allowed, know if I'm allowed to say the doctor's name, but one noted expert in the fields of neuroscience and psychology, he says that children are based on how they're treated and based on what they observe, they learn how they're supposed to be treated and how they're supposed to treat other people. So if they observe a person acting as if everyone is getting on his or her nerves, talking about how nerve-wracking people are, then the belief can be implanted into the child's mind during the formative years. And without any intervention, this belief will follow the child into his or her adult life. So this belief can cause a person to lose relationships. So there's a person in my family, he's no longer alive. I won't say who the person was. He was very near and dear to my heart. I laugh when I think about him. I'm not laughing because he's no longer here. I loved him dearly. I laugh because he was a very funny person. He was hilarious, but he struggled with a lot of these villain-based beliefs, but his drug of choice was alcohol. And so when he was under the influence of alcohol, this issue would be temporarily suppressed. Now, if you was ever around this person and this person didn't have any alcohol in his system, he would be mean. He would act irritated. He would harshly criticize people. Everything you said got on his nerve. Everything you did got on his nerves. And so, but when he was under the influence of alcohol, the alcohol suppressed this issue for a short period of time. And so people wouldn't bother him. He could be around people and enjoy their presence and make jokes and things because the alcohol would suppress the issue. Now, on all of my belief system cards, these are my cognitive restructuring cards. I have a set of the 100 most commonly seen villain lies and a set of the 100 most commonly seen victim lies. But on these cards, I have feeling words around each dysfunctional belief. Feelings such as frustrated, disgusted, provoked, lonely, regretful, rejected, tense, cynical. So these villain-based beliefs produce negative feelings just like the victim-based beliefs. And so I saw this particular family member, this person, he was rarely not under the influence. He was a functional alcoholic. He would be under the influence all the time, and most people just didn't know it because he was functional. He drank so much alcohol till he could walk around and like he was functioning and doing everyday things other people were doing, and you didn't know he was under the influence. And so, but I saw him during a period where he couldn't drink because he was having health problems, and they had told him to stop drinking, which only lasted a short period of time. But I saw him act out of this villain-based belief and a lot of other ones. And people couldn't hardly stand to be around him because of how mean he acted towards everyone. So, yes, villain based beliefs can cause a person to develop an addiction, just like victim based beliefs to suppress the issues for short periods of time. So, let's say a person drug of choice was marijuana and they struggled with this belief. I was around a woman who used a lot of marijuana and she had small children. And she would tell, she was being honest with me. She was saying, my children, and they were very young and they were very rambunctious. When I would go over to her house, she would have to, every 2 minutes, she would have to tell them to stop jumping up and down on the couch and turning cartwheels and running through the house. They were very energetic, very energetic. And she would be like snapping at them. But she told me at one point, she said, she hadn't got high yet, but she said that she smokes marijuana because her children don't get on her nerves. See, she had this issue. People are nerve-wracking and barely tolerable. Now, we know children can be challenging, but her level of irritation was above, what you would expect a mother to have towards her child being a child. But they didn't bother her when she was under the influence. So I'm talking about the effect, why a lot of people struggle with addictions, even though they try to get clean, they try to get sober. But if they don't address a lot of these root causes, these dysfunctional unconscious beliefs that they've been suppressing for short periods of time with the alcohol and drugs, then it's hard for them to stay clean and sober long term. So let's say a person's drug of choice is an opioid and they struggle with this villain-based belief. People are nerve-wracking and barely tolerable. When a person is under the influence of an opioid like heroin or some type of pill, opioid laced pill, opioid based pill, if they're in a full opioid nod, this issue is suppressed. They're oblivious to everyone and everything around them. So people could be doing all sorts of irritating, annoying things, and they're oblivious to it. The only time they would get irritated if whatever somebody was doing disrupted their nod, and then they usually would come out for a second, come out the nod for a second, and go right back in. Now, when I was in active addiction, my drug of choice was stimulants, but I would be around people who had opioid addiction. So I saw this. I actually saw this happening. In hindsight, now I can code what was happening. Back then, I didn't know about the unconscious mind or the role of these dysfunctional beliefs and why we were all sitting there in the dope house. I know now. But in hindsight, I can reflect back and code what I saw. And the way I saw people using drugs and alcohol to temporarily suppress these dysfunctional unconscious beliefs. So let's say a person is a drug of choice is a stimulant like cocaine or crack or meth. Then there's a little more complexity to that type of drug of choice. But let's say they struggle with this dysfunctional unconscious belief. People are nerve-wracking and barely tolerable most of the time. A lot of times people who have these addictions that require so much money and so much activity to maintain, their tolerance level for other people increases because they need those interactions to help them obtain more drugs. They need to interact with people to try to get money and other resources so that they can get high. So their tolerance level greatly increases even before they ingest the substance, just in the process of obtaining it. But let's say a person has been using the stimulant for a long period of time. One of the side effects is psychosis, and the paranoia starts kicking in. After a while, people who use certain stimulants, they're not even getting high anymore. They just get paranoid. I know it happened to me, and I spent a lot of years around people watching people who were extremely paranoid due to the drug that they were using. So if a person is paranoid, they may act out of the belief out of fear, like telling everybody to be quiet, so they can hear because they think something's coming or somebody's coming, but they're not acting out of like you getting on my nerves. They just like be quiet because their focus is not on how irritating people are. Their focus is on protect. They're in survival mode because the paranoia, the psychosis is telling them something bad getting ready to happen, and you got to make sure you figure out the plotter. Make sure you figure out what that noise is you heard in the basement. So they're it's like that distraction thing, and so they're too engrossed in their paranoid delusion to be thinking about whether or not somebody is tolerable. They're trying to save the world. Now, let me give you a personal example, themselves and anybody who's in their world. But let me give you a personal example. At one point in my addiction, I lived in this place where you could rent rooms by the month. This is a crack motel, this was the short period in my addiction that I had what I called a boyfriend, my little so-called boyfriend. It was short-lived. And but anyway, his drug of choice was marijuana and alcohol. So and he couldn't understand me, using a substance that just made me get paranoid. And I remember him sitting there and he sold drugs too. So it bothered him because he had developed real feelings for me. And it wasn't reciprocal. I was, I had an addiction, and I had a relationship with my drug of choice back then. I've been clean 22 years for anybody who may just pop on and hear me talking about drugs. I'm in recovery now, but back then I remember being really paranoid, and I remember him sitting there just staring at me and shaking his head. And he was like, why would you spend all of that money just to be paranoid? You are paying to be paranoid. And I remember looking at him going, shh. I was telling him to shh, be quiet. I was trying to listen because something was coming, right? So it wasn't like, I was irritated, but it wasn't because of this issue. I was irritated because I was paranoid and I was trying to protect us from whatever was coming. I didn't know what was coming, but the paranoid delusion says something coming. And I remember at times because there were other times when I wouldn't be as paranoid and I would be under the influence. The only time he could be around me was when I was under the influence, and that meant he had to pay for me to be under the influence, or else I would leave and so I could go get money and stuff so I could be under the influence. And it was almost like he was paying me, he was spending money so to suppress all these issues. And I had a bunch of them. I had the victim and the villains. And so if I wasn't under the influence and he would try to hang out with me, I would be acting irritated, annoyed, like everything he did or said got on my nerves. And so he would spend money. It was almost like he was putting money into a jukebox to get me to, be okay, to be the person that he liked being around for short increments of time. And when the dope wore off, that person was gone, and the person with all these issues was sitting there staring at him with an attitude. And so, he almost went bankrupt trying to be my boyfriend. He eventually figured it out and went on about his life. But the point I'm making is that these people who have these addictions to drugs and alcohol, a lot of times they are suppressing dysfunctional unconscious beliefs that impact the way they feel, impact the way they act, impact the way they think. They're suppressing them for short periods of time. So I'm going to read the functional belief that challenges the lie, because these beliefs are also lies. People are nerve-wracking and barely tolerable most of the time. There are some people who do and say annoying things. Those individuals only do and say what they do and say because other individuals have not set boundaries with them in those areas. We, the human race as a whole, are all tolerating each other to a certain degree. We have to occupy this place called Earth together. We can enjoy each other, but make no mistake about it. We all have the potential to get on each other's nerves. That being the case, we should learn to be more tolerable of each other's differences and idiosyncrasies. At the same time, we have a right to set boundaries with people who are doing things that are excessively annoying and irritating. Individuals also have a right to set boundaries with us if they feel we are doing things that are excessively annoying and irritating. What no one has a right to do is act as if everyone should do and say only those things that he or she approves of as acceptable. And I know I have worked, like I said, with people who struggle with substance use disorders for years, and residential and outpatient settings. And I've had people in my office who struggle primarily with these red cards, these villain-based beliefs, and they would come to my office. Now they were clean, and I worked in a place that was a long-term residential facility. So a lot of these people were at a stage where they could go in and out of the facility and get a job and stuff. They were transitioning out because they had been there. It was long-term facility. And I would have people in my office just frustrated and upset and complaining about everybody at work and everybody at the facility and everybody at the 12-step meetings that they attended, and everybody. And I would be hearing beliefs such as this, and I would challenge them on it. And a lot of them, when we would go over the functional beliefs, they would be like, I never thought about it like that, Ms. Freeman. I guess we all could get on each other's nerves. And I would visibly watch them come down. I mean, coming in my office on 10 being extremely stressed. And I would watch them and it wasn't usually just one belief we were talking about during that period. We were usually going through a bunch of them they struggle with. But I would watch them. Now they're clean, they're in recovery, but they struggling with a bunch of negative feelings. So how long do you think they were going to be able to stay clean, walking around every day, annoyed, irritated, frustrated, provoked, antagonistic, indignant? Like, I will watch them come down because their thought process, they had some cognitive distortions that they were no longer able to suppress with the drugs and alcohol for short increments of time. So now all these issues they've been suppressing for years is live and in living color and being triggered all day. But I will watch them when I encourage them and challenge them to think about how they were processing what was happening in a different way. I will watch them come down from a 10 probably to like a 4. And over time, because I worked with them for, a period of time while they were at that particular level, I will watch them come in and be like, you know what, Miss Freeman, I really enjoy my job now. People don't get on my nerves like they used to, because now they understand. But they also had to understand and learn how to set boundaries. There's a lot that goes with it. There's a lot of other things they had to learn, but first they needed to learn, why do I walk around acting mad at everybody? And why does everything everybody do get on my nerves? And it was because of an unconscious belief that was programmed into their minds during the formative years. So let's do one more. I want to do one that is not real obvious. This one is, if people are not exactly like you, they don't fit in and they should be ostracized. It's similar to this other belief that everyone has to be just like you, or there is something horribly wrong with them. I have also worked with people who were in recovery who were struggling with these beliefs here. When they would come to my office, when they were meeting with me, they were venting about somebody. And when we unpacked what they were venting about, they were venting because these people were different. These people thought differently, they dressed differently, they talked differently, but they had these unconscious beliefs that told them these people are doing something horribly wrong. And in a lot of cases, the people they were mad at weren't doing anything wrong, but being themselves. They were just different than the people that were sitting in my office. But they had these unconscious beliefs that was making them feel indignant, impatient, tense, upset, disdainful, cynical, threatened, nervous, anxious, angry, contemptuous, uncomfortable, regretful because they had acted out against them, and hate. A lot of times even a strong emotion like hate, because somebody was different than them. So how can these types of beliefs, these two beliefs I just read, be implanted into a child's mind during the formative years? So if a child is raised up in an environment in which he or she observed people acting as if other people were tainted or somehow just unworthy because they were different, then the child is being programmed to believe like, hey, everyone has to be just like you, or something's wrong with them. Everybody who's not like you should be ostracized, right? You should make fun of them. You should ostracize them. You should talk about them. And they grew up watching people do that. And sometimes it has to do with race or socioeconomic condition, but you don't have to. It could be a person raised in one particular household where they acted as if other people in the family or other people in the neighborhood, like they were something wrong with them because they were different, even though they were the same racial. They was the same race. They were from the same race, right? Same race, same ethnicity, a lot of, but these beliefs can be implanted via observation. They can also be implanted via maltreatment, but I just want to focus tonight mainly on observation, because even though villain-based beliefs can be programmed into a person's mind via maltreatment, one of the primary ways they are programmed is via observation, observing other people, treating people like something's wrong with them, overhearing people talking about other people in a negative way simply because they're different than them, right? Harshly criticizing them. So that's a lot of stress, a lot of negative feelings to walk around carrying all day, every day. So let's say a person is under the influence of alcohol. That's their drug of choice. And they struggle with these two beliefs that make them feel that other people should be just like them or something's wrong with them. People under the influence of alcohol are a little more tolerable of other people and their differences, right? Now, alcohol affects everyone differently. So some people will still act out of these issues under the influence, right? And I want to make the point that, like, you could be around 3 or 4 people who all suffer with the exact same 2 issues, and it could affect all 3 of them differently. There will be some commonality in how the same belief affects certain people, but they can't affect different people in a different way. But I've been around a lot of people under the influence of alcohol. I've been under the influence of alcohol, and I was much more receptive of other people and more, of their differences, and willing to engage with them when I was under the influence of alcohol. Let's say marijuana. Someone's drug of choice is marijuana. I've seen people and worked with a lot of people who were under the influence of marijuana. I saw them under the influence when I was in active addiction, but I've worked with a lot of people as a certified alcohol and drug counselor who would tell me about the effects of marijuana and why they struggled to quit. And they were more accepting of people. Like, they would be getting high at the dope house, and they would be having these, philosophizing. They would be philosophizing and talking about politics. And, sometimes they would be arguing back and forth, but it would be a friendly argument. They would be laughing because they're under the influence. So they were much more accepting and tolerant of other people under the influence. Now, am I suggesting that people need drugs and alcohol so that they can function better and interact? No, absolutely not. Those are dysfunctional coping mechanisms that come with a lot of consequences. My point is that people need to be able to address the root causes of what they're really self-medicating with alcohol and drugs. So let's say a person's drug of choice is an opioid. Now, people who are in a full opioid nod, they're oblivious to everyone and everything around them. They're not in a full opioid nod saying, I really don't like people who are different than me. They are oblivious. They could be all sorts of people from different races, socioeconomic classes, all religions, creed. They wouldn't care because they're oblivious. They were much more accepting. And I'm telling you, these dysfunctional villain-based beliefs, they cause people to develop addictions just as easily as the villain, victim-based beliefs, those victim beliefs we talked about last week that people suppress with drugs and alcohol. People use drugs and alcohol to suppress the villain-based beliefs also. So let's say a person's drug of choice is a stimulant. Let's say they're addicted, they use cocaine, crack, or meth. Now, the effect of the drugs, the stimulant drugs, they're still more tolerant of people due to their need to interact with people to obtain the drugs and alcohol. Like, I remember when I was in active addiction, I remember one time where one of the young men who sold drugs, he decided to do a lengthy monologue on what a horrible, disgusting piece of trash he thought I was. And the whole time he was talking, I was thinking about my reply. And when he got through, and he went on and on and on, when he got through, I looked at him and asked him if I could have one on credit. I was just so much more tolerable, because the only thing he represented to me was at that point in active addiction, because I had crossed from abuse into dependency back then towards the end of my active addiction before I got clean. I had crossed into dependency, and what he was talking about was irrelevant, so I didn't care what he thought about me, how different he thought he thought he was different. He thought he was better than me. But the way I looked at it, we were both sitting in the dope house and we both had addictions. He had addictions to the street life and trying to get that so-called easy money. It's not easy money. It ends with a lot of people in the penitentiary or the graveyard, but he was addicted to the lifestyle. He just didn't know it. And I was addicted to drugs. But at the point I'm making is that, hey, how he felt about me, or the fact that he thought we were so different, and he was, it was irrelevant to me. So the need to interact with people to obtain the drugs and alcohol causes some people to, like, cancel out these beliefs that tell them other people have to be like them, or other people, there's something wrong with them if they're not exactly like them. And then, a lot of times people, they come to a common place because of their addiction. I remember one time in active addiction, and for some reason, I guess because I had been up so many days without sleep, I was just sitting there observing. I wasn't really even getting high. I was just sitting there observing. And I sat there for about an hour just observing the different people that were there at this place, this house of where they sold drugs and people got high. And there were Caucasian, African American, Latino, there was old people, there were young people, there were middle-aged people. And I was just looking around, of course they were engaging in some strange mannerisms because of the drugs, but I was also noticing how they interacted with each other. It was all about getting high. They weren't sitting there judging each other, so I'm telling you, like, active addiction and these addictions, they will cause people not to engage, like they suppress the issue for short increments of time. Either the alcohol and drug effect suppresses the issue, or the desperation from the need that causes them to have to do things they normally wouldn't do suppresses those issues for short increments of time. So I'm going to read the functional beliefs that challenge these two dysfunctional beliefs, villain-based beliefs. That's what we're talking about this week, that cause people to develop drug and alcohol addictions. So let's do this first belief. If people are not exactly like you, they don't fit in, and they should be ostracized. The functional belief says diversity is what makes the world go around. People don't have to look like you, talk like you, dress like you, or think like you. We all have our place in the world. If everyone looked like you, this would be one boring planet. If everyone talked like you, how awful would that be? You might as well buy a parrot. George S. Patton put it like this: if everyone is thinking alike, then somebody isn't thinking. Another wise person said that people tend to fear what they can't understand or control. Often that fear is camouflaged as hatred or disgust. People don't like to feel afraid. So instead of admitting that their fear is based on their own thought process, they blame the object for the subject's reaction. Stop fearing people who are different than you. Villains come in all shapes, forms, sizes, races, and social economic classes. Learn to embrace diversity. If you have a team, the power of the team will be in the diversity. The team can have the same goal, but each person's individuality is what makes the team a powerful force. And I remember I told you when I worked at the residential center, I was there about 2.5 years, and working with the people. I was working with the people. It was a therapeutic community model, and I was working with people who were at the higher levels who could go in and out of the facility, have jobs, go to college, different things. And when I was talking, and most of them have been clean for about a year or so, and I've had them sitting in my office because now they had been in the residential center closed in for a period of time till they advanced to the level where they could go out and intermingle with society. But because they hadn't used drugs and alcohol, a lot of these issues they had been suppressing for years started popping out the bushes on them. And they would come in my office after a long day at work or at school or whatever and be like, man, Miss Freeman, so-and-so got on my nerves today at work. And at school, my professor got on my nerves, or somebody in my classroom is getting on my nerves. And when they would be talking about somebody that they found frustrating, annoying, irritating, and it was just because those people were different than them. In a lot of cases, when we unpacked what the people were doing that was making them feel, a particular way, they were just being themselves. They didn't think like them. They didn't talk like them. They didn't dress like them. They had different ideals about projects at work or different ideals about projects at school, and they would contribute their thoughts. And the person who was afflicted by this dysfunctional, unconscious, villain-based belief, they sitting in my office frustrated, annoyed, irritated, walking around with all these negative feelings, trying to stay clean and sober. And so I read the functional belief. They would walk out my office with a stack of these, and they would use those to help them deactivate the dysfunctional belief in real time, and that would change the way they felt. So now I'm going to read the functional belief that challenges the dysfunctional belief. Everyone has to be just like you, or there's something horribly wrong with them. It's very similar to the other one I just read. No one in this world is mandated to be you, but you. There is a certain way you like to think, and that's the way you think. There's a certain way you like to dress, and that is the way you like to dress. There are certain foods you like to eat, and that is what you like to eat. There is a certain way to talk. There's a certain way you talk, and that is the way you talk. There are certain hairstyles you like, and those are hairstyles you like. There are certain things you classify as normal, and those are the things you classify as normal. What's the point? People don't have to think like you, dress like the foods you like, talk like you, or like the same hairstyles you like. You accept and respect your right to be you and like what you like, right? Others have a right to be who they are and like what they like. Stop trying to clone the world. This world would be a boring place if we were all the same. And so, the point I'm making is that a person can struggle with villain-based beliefs that can cause them to develop drug and alcohol problems just as easily as the villain-based beliefs. For example, I'll do one more real quick. Let's say a person struggles with this dysfunctional unconscious belief. It's a villain-based belief. I can treat my significant other any way I want to, and he or she has to put up with me. Now, there's a lot of people who struggle with this unconscious belief. It's a villain-based belief, but this belief produces a lot of negative feelings, such as angry, inadequate, indignant, frustrated, betrayed, suspicious, rejected, and despised, because there's people only going to put up with maltreatment and abuse for so long. So a lot of the people who struggle with this dysfunctional unconscious belief, they walk around feeling hurt and rejected because people frequently leave them. And so, but they don't understand. People are rejecting your behavior as opposed to rejecting, they're rejecting your behavior, more than they're rejecting you. They're rejecting your belief system, but this is an unconscious belief system. So I'm going to read the functional belief that challenges the dysfunctional belief. I can treat my significant other any way I want to, and he or she has to put up with me. My significant other does not have to accept abuse from me in any shape, form, or fashion. I can be replaced, and I need to understand that. There are many people who will treat the person I'm abusing with dignity and respect. There are many loving, caring, sensitive, responsible, strong, brave, attractive people in the world who would love the opportunity to have someone in their lives. My significant other may have some issues, but so do I. We both may need to work through some things, but in the meantime, I need to treat my mate with dignity and respect or risk losing him or her. No one is irreplaceable. I may have learned the PIMP game from individuals, and PIMP is an acronym, power in manipulating people. So a lot of people, they manipulate. That's the abuse that they distribute to people. It says, I may have learned the PIMP game from individuals who did not know how to have people in their lives except by manipulation and control. But I better learn something new. If I could learn how to mistreat people, I can learn how to be in healthy relationships. And so even with people who struggle with this particular dysfunctional unconscious belief, a lot of them struggle with relapse, because they would be mistreating their significant others, and people would get tired of it and leave them, and they don't have drugs and alcohol to medicate those feelings, because even though they were mistreating the person and they tried to control it, they didn't know it was being produced. The way they were acting was coming from an unconscious belief. A lot of times they lose people they really love because they don't know how to treat them right. So now they have all of these negative feelings, hurt, rejected, regretful, and they try to stay clean and sober. And unfortunately, a lot of them end up at the bar or at the dope house. So that's all for this episode this is episode 9 of the Emancipated Mind Show. Next week, my topic is low self-esteem. It'll probably be 2 parts too. I'll do the victim-based beliefs that produce low self-esteem next. That's under the umbrella of low self-esteem. I'll talk about several of those next week. And then the following week, I'll talk about some victim-based beliefs that are under the umbrella of low self-esteem. If you would like more information about my work, feel free to visit my website, Anneshia You can go to my store page, and you can actually purchase this workbook in both sets of cards. They come together. I have other workbooks such as My Unaddressed Issues Make My Budget and My Schedule, and the workbook, The Adult Reenactment of the Childhood Script. I also have a lot of audio series that are available. So I will put the links to some of the links to my website in the comment section under this video. I also offer life coaching packages. And so if you're interested in working with me individually in private, I'll put the link to my coaching package. Again, thank you and enjoy the rest of your evening. Thank you for watching the Emancipated Mind Show. Join me every week live on Facebook and YouTube on Thursdays from 7 o'clock p.m. to 7:45 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. For more information about my products and services, feel free to visit my website, AnnesiaConsulting.com, or my website, AnnesiaSpeaks.com. I can also be reached via email at afreeman@AnnesiaConsulting.com. I'll see you next week.